All right. Welcome to the Obvious Podcast. This is episode number 84. My name is Sonny.
And I'm Peter Daiga, President and CEO at the ABC Florida East Coast.
You are watching us or listening to the Obvious Podcast, where all opinions expressed are our own, unless we say otherwise.
Love the show. We ask you to subscribe on any major podcast platform or watch us in action on YouTube. Follow the Obvious Podcast on Instagram, X, and True Social, and now on TikTok. All the links you need are in the show notes. Reach out to us anytime at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. And if you're enjoying the ride, help others find us by leaving a review wherever you listen. Happy Friday, son.
Happy Friday, Peter. Hope you had a nice Easter week.
I did.
Easter Sunday, right?
Yeah.
And everything is going really well. By the way, did you know, as I was reading this about our show, it's available on YouTube with or without video? I found that out this weekend.
Yes, I found
I didn't
it a
know
couple
that.
weekends ago when I clicked on the wrong one.
I did
like,
too.
Where's the video? So, yeah.
So if you're looking for the video and it's not playing, there's another link there, and it's usually they're right next to each other, so you will find them.
So I wanted to talk, Sonny, about we received our first award as a podcast.
Excellent.
At the
Is it a
ABC
Grammy?
National Convention. It's called Shandy. So shout out to Shandon, chapter president out in San Diego. So she's the current chapter president's liaison on the ABC National Executive Committee and head of the ABC chapter president's executive committee. So any event, our first award, a Shandy Award.
Congratulations.
Which took quite a bit of work from what I understand. It's kind of very unique. There's only 20 others like them. Approximately 20 others that she gave away for different other reasons at the convention. So anyway, our first award.
Excellent.
As a podcast. It's pretty
Excellent.
cool.
Yep.
So
very exciting. I wanted to talk to you about in the Catholic Church, when you have the, I know you don't call it a message, the Sunday
homily.
Mm-hmm. Do those tend to be related at all, or is it like a pattern, or will a priest come up and say, for the next 5 weeks, we're going to talk about the Pauline epistles or something like that? Or is it different every Sunday? Do you understand my question?
I don't know. I'm not sure. So, I mean, there's obviously a very structured to the readings
right.
at every Sunday Mass. There's
right.
always an Old Testament reading, an epistle reading, and then a gospel reading. The church very carefully, by the way, over the course of 3 years, pretty much the whole Bible is preached
and read.
Okay. At Sunday Mass, and they're all very related. In fact, I've always found, since I had my reconversion, if you will, because we talked in other, about falling away, when you're in your teens and your 20s and coming back and whatnot.
Yep.
I find it fascinating to try to figure out how all the readings are connected, because the church is, for some reason, ties them together. They're there for a reason together, and they're sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. And then there are some periods where, like Lent or Easter or the different liturgical seasons where the readings for a number of weeks or for a period will be related.
Okay. So the reason I'm asking, so in
the homilies are supposed to be. Now you always have rogue priests,
rogue priests, yeah.
unfortunately, but they're instructed that it's supposed to be a homily on the readings and tying all the readings together and what the teaching is.
Got it. So in the churches that I've attended, and again, setting aside the liturgical times, the pastor will come up and he'll say, we're starting a new series on, and sometimes, sort of the new agey churches will get into themes. Mm-hmm. But the churches that I have attended usually tend to get into, say, the writings. So we're going to cover the book of Corinthians for the next 4 weeks, or we're going to cover this, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is I think our next few...
Why are you bringing this up, Sonny?
I'll get to it. Our next few episodes...
Are going to have a theme?
Are going to have a theme, and the theme of our next few episodes will be communication.
Communication. Yep. Okay.
And how important that is, and what happens when it falls apart, and how it's connected, and how it's related, and how it matters in leadership, how it matters certainly at ABC and everything that we do as executives.
Have you heard me say, because I've said it often, it's something I feel like I've learned through life, which is pretty much every problem boils down to communication.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard me say that?
Yeah.
It just really that's it's a lack of or miscommunication or something. Whether it's world wars or minor office politics. I mean, I honestly believe most issues boil down to communication.
Absolutely. That's why we want to talk about it. All right. And I know that the issues we're going to talk about in the next few episodes will all sort of have that as the underlying theme, and we're kind of laying it out for you, because when you go through it, and especially if you're listening to the episodes sequentially, you'll kind of see the point that we're trying to make. And the whole point of having a podcast is so that we're able to communicate, right? That's the whole idea behind it. Whether it's whatever it is we're trying to communicate, that's sort of the underlying need to even have a show in the first place.
Right.
And
we've alluded to many times that if people aren't hearing you, then it's difficult to communicate.
Yeah. Then it's
so if you had a boring podcast, there would really be no value or little value in trying to communicate at all through the podcast, right? So you first of all got to have people's attention and have them listening.
Yeah, exactly. I remember Mr. Producer telling us that most by the way, the contest continues. So if you want to send us an email as to why Peter's ringing the bell.
Yeah, pretty much any show.
Yeah.
The first email after that show was live. Is that how you refer to it? Aired. If you're the first email, you'll have to trust us on that one. So we're happy to give you some kind of gift.
Well, we've had some winners. We've had a couple of winners. And we've given some gifts away. Yep. So, but I remember Mr. Producer telling us when we hit... was it 9 episodes, 10 episodes? That it was like we were already in like rarefied air, because most people never go past 3, right?
Hard to believe.
3 or 5, most people just kind of stop because, it's nobody's listening, nobody's watching, and they lose interest or they lose hope, and they go on. And we're at episode 84. This is right. Well, I can't believe 84. Like I never thought we would be talking about.
Me neither, honestly.
84 episodes.
So
I mean, it's amazing, and it's all thanks to our audience. Anyway, so communication, and the thing that it's been in the news this past week that we've all kind of talked about in the past couple of weeks is the pilots getting rescued in Iran. And I've been thinking about communication a lot over the last few months actually, and how I've always kind of prided myself. I always thought I was a great communicator, right? One, in school, like, debating things and things like that. I've done well on papers. I've done well academically. And so, like, public speaking isn't an issue for me. And so I always thought, I'm a great communicator. And, throughout my life, people are like, oh, man, you're so blunt and you're so straightforward, which is fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that because, in my mind, as the title of this episode, clarity creates kindness. Because I think if you're clear with people, it really makes life a lot easier.
And I tend to agree with that.
Right.
Except, I think that's kind of the nuance of this.
That's the nuance of the
show or the series, is that all sorts of people communicate differently.
Exactly.
And some people with that kind of clarity, like for example, you might make the argument that our current president kind of falls in that category. He's very blunt. Some people think he's too direct.
Yeah.
Crude even, which maybe all those things are true, but that communication style is problematic for some people. And they want it more nuanced.
Not only is it problematic,
in order to receive it.
It's the actions are subservient to the style.
What do you mean by that?
Like the fact that it doesn't matter what his policies are, it doesn't matter the end result of his policies, because his communication style is so
that's
abrasive and blunt and all of that. That's where they stop.
Yeah.
And
what a powerful lesson for all of us about communication,
right?
Right? Okay.
That's
all right.
That's so part of my trigger for this episode. I watched this reel on Instagram. It was a long reel, and it was a capture of Donald Trump's interviews over the last 35 years.
Okay.
Right. Different shows
on a given topic.
Any topic.
It was just showing.
Yeah, just clips of him.
Okay.
From different interviews going back to the 80s.
Okay.
And there he is in the 80s talking about...
Is your argument, the style is very similar? Or what's the...
The style is very similar and the content's very similar, right? So he's talking about tariffs back in the 80s. He's talking about China back in the 80s.
Yeah.
He's talking about Iran back in the 80s. And so my point of that was like, the man hasn't changed, right? So
Right,
this whole idea that somehow he's sort of a hostage to world leaders or whatever,
please.
right? Like, I mean, you just listen to that,
Yeah.
and you're like, if
So
you just look at
sophomoric,
it,
that whole approach, and so simpleton.
right?
So
But it also
anyway,
back
that's
to
some
our-
people's style, though.
right. But going back to our point about
style.
communication, like it blows my mind that we don't have people who can't see past that, like who can't see the results, right?
Right.
And they're upset about the way he tweets or the way he communicates. And what do you do in a situation like that? Like, what would you do? Would you change your communication style? Would you try to adapt it? Would you just be like, like obviously for somebody like the president, his audience is the whole country. It's liberals, it's conservatives, it's middle of the road people. He can't really craft a message, but those of us who aren't in such a sort of widely recognized position, we have the ability to sort of craft our messaging and our communication style. How do you tackle that?
I mean, you have a lot of resources, obviously, in terms of the press office, and and then the other thing that's unfortunate in my book, I got to stop saying that, because at episode 84, there's probably very little we haven't talked about in some way or another. But it's unfortunate that, most people, you can rely on the press to do their digging and to be fair-minded about it.
Wow.
And to present a case in a different way, or at least this is the dream. This is the expectation, I think, for most Americans. Well, maybe not anymore. I don't know, but that should be the press we have. That should be the, and by the way, talk about communication. Well, there's your opportunity to communicate that. If you could actually rely, instead of on a partisan press, on a press that actually took a particular issue and then delved into it and talked about the different aspects of it, that would be a different way of communicating. I mean, but you can't even rely on that anymore.
You can't. I mean, you and I have done multiple episodes on how you can't hate the media enough. So I think that's, and if you were going to look at us as somebody making a case in a court of law, I think we've done a spectacular job of showing you how dishonest the media is. And therefore, their messaging can't be trusted, right? So the onus to do your own evidence and your own research falls upon you. But what I wanted to talk about was the pilots issue, right? So you are talking about a guy who's lost in a hostile country, a country that we are bombing. You're talking about a guy who's injured. That's what a lot of people said, that when you eject, there's such incredible G-force.
Sure.
And then you're talking about all these people sort of in a lack of a better term, a bureaucratic environment, trying to find him and rescue him. And if there's any miscommunication in that, I mean, it happens, right? Friendly fire happens. There's miscommunication that happens even in military settings. But if there's any miscommunication in rescuing this guy, either his rescue gets delayed or it doesn't happen.
Right.
And so you could argue that in some way the military has solved that problem, although certainly not to 100%, and nothing ever is 100%.
Yeah.
But to a large degree, I think they've solved that problem. And to me, it's very impressive that so many different people are able to communicate so many different ways. And then you could argue that that's because they have a common mission, right? So then, right, I just want you to follow my thought on this common mission.
It's coming together for me.
Exactly, right? So you have, I can see it in your face it's coming together. Like you have a common mission.
Sure.
And if you, as an individual who's involved in the pursuit of the common mission, in this case, rescuing that pilot, put aside your own conflict of interest, whatever that might be, right?
Right.
And you just focus on the mission. I think you can diminish, not eliminate, but you can certainly diminish.
And I don't know if this is where you're going or if this is appropriate, but and talking about putting aside conflicts of interest, boy, surviving and living is a pretty personal interest. That a lot of people, in order to rescue him, had to put aside that conflict of interest.
100%.
Right. So how do military people do that? I guess maybe being court-martialed or going in jail is part of it. I don't know. So but any event. Is that kind of like,
that's where I was taking this.
All right, yeah, but most organizations don't have that luxury, right?
Exactly.
So, and I'm sure, whether people realize it or not, there's an underlying purpose in our conversation, oftentimes, even when it's about current affairs. So much translates or applies into our work lives and oftentimes our personal lives and our professional lives, and even as an association.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's kind of, How are you hoping to tie all this in?
To remind people that one of the best ways you can communicate effectively is by putting together a team where you all focus on just the mission, right?
And how important that is.
And how important the mission is. Exactly. Because if you can, there's a certain...
Because you've done a good job of showing that when it comes to, say, the military. Mm-hmm. And in specific, we had a recent example.
Yep.
So,
and
that's your point.
That's my whole point.
If you get away from the mission,
yep.
Like that communication and that
completely falls apart.
Yeah.
Completely falls apart. Yeah. Because then nobody's focused on the mission. Everybody's kind of focused on their own sort of pet interest or pet peeve or pet whatever you want to call it. And it's just, then you talk past each other. And then it's like the pursuit of the mission falls apart. But then, and this is how Trump is related, any recognition of success falls apart. Because you can't even agree on if you're not pursuing the mission, you can't agree on what success looks like. If you can't agree on that, any recognition of that just goes by the wayside because you're so invested in your perspective being the one that everybody ought to follow as opposed to what the mission is. Because if you individually pursue anything, you're going to fail, right? The whole idea, and I hate saying the word collective, the whole idea of our existence as an association is that we all come together and pursue a common mission.
Right.
And the minute you step away from the mission, that's how miscommunication starts. Mm-hmm. And that's my whole point of this episode is...
What is that mission? To help our members win work and deliver that work
profitably, safely,
and ethically. Right. So everything we do, we like to think. And of course, the reason we have annual planning conferences and volunteer leaders that help us keep us accountable to the mission that they set is to make sure that we're holding true to that. And we would argue, and again, we have to assess this all the time, but everything we do, whether it's being the single largest provider of apprenticeship education and workforce development,
or having
and the millions that we invest, correct, right. Or the tremendous amount of investment that we do in terms of government affairs. All this is towards that end of helping our members, win work and deliver it safely, ethically, and profitably.
Yeah.
So
that's literally why we exist, right?
Right.
And so every single thing we do, that's why we're a publisher. That's why we're a landlord. That's why we are an event planner. That's why we have a podcast. That's why we have a communications department. That's why we have all these elements come together to serve that mission.
Right.
And if anytime you wander away from that, you're going to have problems.
Right.
And you're going to have...
And there are some people that recognize that more clearly and some that don't, And there are a lot of different organizations that do one aspect of what we do well, not necessarily the others. And I guess that's sometimes where things fall apart in terms of communication is that some of these things sometimes are nuanced, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Some things are more obvious and upfront. Other things took a little development or thinking in order to get there. Like, did we want to become, that largest workforce development organization in the industry? Both reaching out to entry-level people and new people who decide to commit their lives to the industry and being a professional in the industry, as well as developing people that are already there, making sure they're the very best talented people in the industry. Some people could argue, a lot of the steps along the way to get there, people might have not seen so clearly.
Right.
And that gets back to the whole full circle in terms of communication.
Exactly.
I think.
But your mission wasn't even to be the largest. Your mission was to grow the construction industry, right? So success in that...
members address the problem that they were facing,
exactly,
as it is today.
And to success in that has what's led us to be able to say we're the largest in the state of Florida. Not because we were like, let's go be the largest in the state of Florida. Let's just solve a problem for our members.
But to your point, if you lose sight of that mission, the overall mission, and not just one aspect of it, you're gonna potentially have a problem. Recognizing the various steps along the way and the various efforts and the overall value, if you will, of the organization and what it's doing. So
the last thing I'll say on this, because we're out of time, believe it or not, is that whatever your mission is, whatever your organization is, whatever work you pursue, make sure everybody is coalesced around the same mission. And I think once you do that, it's going to make the challenge of communication a lot easier, because if you're all pursuing the same goal together, it's going to be way more effective.
That also helps avoid the conflicts of interest
100%.
when you're unified around that mission.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us and listening and honoring us with your time. We will see you next Friday with another great episode.
All right. And for comments, send us an email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Till next time.
Thanks for the Shandy.
We got our Shandy. Ciao.
Take care.